Hey guys, it's Kirsten. Today I'm so excited to share this interview I just did, interview conversation with a lovely guest named Rachel. She has started her own consulting firm, and I will let you stick around to find out more of the details during our conversation of what she has created after her professional career in dance. But I thought this would be really meaningful for those of you who are contemplating transitioning, or inevitably you will have to go from dancing full time to something else. It happens to everybody. And so this is for those of you who are contemplating that and maybe afraid of it. And I wanted to inspire you with Rachel's example that she is setting for all of us and show you just one of the many things that is possible following a career in dance. So I hope you will enjoy this conversation. If you are brand new here, I do mindset and transition coaching. I specifically help dancers increase their confidence, get through difficult injuries, and also find clarity in their next steps after ballet. So that's just a bit about me if you're brand new. But thank you again for watching, and I hope that you will learn as much as I did through this conversation. Okay, Rachel, thank you so much for being here. And just for our audience who's watching, this is Rachel Cossar, right? Cossar?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, yes. I always want to make sure I'm saying people's names perfectly. Growing up as a twin, I always had my name said incorrectly, so I'm ultra sensitive to that. But anyway, so for everyone watching, Rachel is a former professional ballet dancer with Boston Ballet for 10 years, and also a rhythmic gymnast, which I find ultra cool. And also the founder of Choreography for Business, which through this consulting practice you started, I saw that you help individuals embody competence and confidence in a business setting. So Rachel, again, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your experience. I'd love it if we could start by you just sharing a little bit more about Choreography for Business and what motivated you to start this.
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think what you're doing as well with your business and helping dancers figure out the drama of transition is so needed and important. So Choreography for Business, as you mentioned briefly, is a consulting practice where I coach people in embodiment, basically. So that fancy, almost buzzword can be broken down into a deep understanding of body awareness to the point where you can start making more intentional choices when it comes to your body language in a variety of contexts. So I do tend to focus on professional settings, but the tools that we develop in my programs are actually very useful for a variety of other contexts, whether social, networking based, or personal. And so in essence, what I've done is brought a series of very unique skills that I'm an expert in as a former professional ballet dancer, performing under pressure and having a deep knowledge of the capacity for expression that my body has, as well as a deep understanding of physicality and applying them in relevant ways in different industries.
Right. And that is so interesting. I'm sure it's something that a lot of your clients hadn't considered as something that's so valuable, to like really embody the thing that you're trying to show. And so, yeah, it's amazing that you've taken that strength and just that natural ability that dancers tend to have of embodying a story, a certain character, whatever that is, and really putting it into the real world and showing people that, hey, this is valuable. It is a very unique skill that dancers, especially you, have. So how did you come up with this idea?
Yeah, so when I was dancing, I pursued my undergraduate education. So for any non-dancers who might be listening, once you have gone through your professional career as a dancer, you usually go back to school to get an undergrad. At this time, I don't think there are any perfect solutions for getting your undergrad while you're dancing unless you're like a super hustler. So that being said, I got my undergrad while I was dancing. So once I retired, I didn't need to go back to school immediately. So armed with my undergrad, I took stock of the skills that I had and figured out which ones were most marketable to get my foot in the door at pretty much any institution, right? It can be a challenge to face some very traditional roles and job descriptions when you've never been in an office in your life. But I had done some work in fundraising while I was with the ballet. So on the organizational level, I had done a lot of work with our young professionals, engaging young professionals, and co-chaired our young professional group for a few years. So I actually just kind of leveraged that experience into a job at Harvard in their fundraising department. And when I started working with Harvard, that was my first 9 to 5. And I actually did approach it in a very non-physical way, because my level of, or my threshold for what I perceived to be physical was exceptionally high, right?
Right.
So I went into this job and I was like, well, it'll be easy. Like, I won't have to warm up. I won't have to keep myself moving throughout the day. I can just kind of plop down at a desk and be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found was that in the first couple of months of doing this and applying myself in this way, I didn't feel very connected to myself. I didn't feel connected to any mission, and certainly didn't feel connected to my colleagues. And I was also kind of I was tired. I didn't have energy.
Right.
And I thought, maybe if I can at least like imbue a bit of physicality into this experience, I'll have a more full time. And so that's what I started doing. I started testing these ideas with myself first, changing the way that I would show up physically at the office. So the way that I would sit, the way that I would stand, the way that I walked up and down stairs, entered into meeting rooms, engaged with people. I just made sure that everything was a little bit more physical. I would take little breaks to do stretches and movements. And I started noticing the effects like immediately. I was feeling better, little aches and pains in certain joints that never bothered me as a dancer, but had started to bug me in this more sedentary lifestyle, went away. And so I was like, I think there's something here. My colleagues noticed, and I don't think that they knew me, well enough in the phase where I was viewing it as like a non-physical enterprise, but they certainly noticed that I had kind of started to come to the office in a different way. And, I was just like, well, these are the things that I've been working on. And they were like, well, that sounds great. Like, can I get some of that, like training? And so that's when I was like, well, maybe there is something here. Maybe there's a need more broadly with the way that people are approaching their daily lives, particularly in some of these very traditionally defined roles and professional contexts. So I started testing this program, this very basic program that I was putting together in Harvard across kind of various departments, but mostly in the fundraising department. And I also actually started working with employees in the restaurant industry. So front of house staff and people who are performing every night and are on their feet every night, and have to negotiate with small awkward spaces that are tightly cramped, loud volume. It's a very nonverbal profession, the restaurant industry. So between those two worlds, I was getting all this information that this was so helpful for people and that nobody was really doing it in the way that I was doing it. So that kind of gave me the motivation, long story, to create and found Choreography for Business.
That's incredible. And I find it so interesting that one detail in your story is that when you noticed you started to feel less kind of, I guess, like you had less vitality, you're being less yourself in that office environment, just noticing that in yourself and making simple shifts towards just feeling a bit more at home in your body or more like your old self that you used to be in dancing, that was when the wheels really started to turn for you. So yeah, it's a really interesting step that everybody can apply to whatever transitional state they're in their life. Just little things to get you grounded again. And you already talked about the way that you started to develop choreography for business and some of the skills that you did use. But just to be even more explicit, what were some of the skills that in your career in ballet really transferred into choreography for business beyond your ability just to kind of hold that space and hold yourself really well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. So for me, I think the most important skill came over, it wasn't just through my career as a ballet dancer, but also in my history as a rhythmic gymnast. So when I was growing up, I was doing uh, training and competing internationally as a rhythmic gymnast on the Canadian national team, and then also on a professional track to become a ballet dancer, and also doing my education, my academics on the side. So I always had my hands in like
That's a lot.
all these different honey pots and very
Yeah.
deep, not just the tips of my fingers, but like the whole hand.
Yeah.
Um, and so that like just provided me with this amazing ability, I think, to see parallels between disparate worlds. And the training that I had as a gymnast greatly influenced my career as a professional ballet dancer, and vice versa. And then, just the critical thinking tools that I was learning in school allowed me to, be transposing ideas and skills all the time. Like I remember at one point I was at San Francisco Ballet one summer, and we were doing some like foresight stuff, and I think at some point I was like, wow, this is like existentialism but for dance, and it was just like, though, like it was only because I was learning and studying political philosophy or political science that I was able to even think of this movement deconstruction as something similar to what I'd learned about in a theoretical conceptual way. So
Yeah.
like carrying that diversity of perspectives and that kind of hunger to always be in different worlds at the same time and see what from one world you can bring into another one, I think has been the reason that I was able to create this business. I think that the general narrative when the time comes to transition is like you have two choices. You either continue to stay in the world of ballet, or you like go back to school and go on to career number two.
Mm-hmm.
And neither one of those is problematic, but
Yeah.
it's more like I felt like it would be a pity and a shame to kind of turn my back on this whole career that I had been so intentional about to not at least look at a different conversation. So for me, it was like that skill of, I guess, creative thinking, and improvisation, right, which was fueled from my background, but then nurtured it throughout my career with Boston Ballet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think it just goes without saying that like dancers who make it to a professional level,
Mm-hmm.
like have had to persevere and
Yes.
understand how to perform under great stress,
Yeah.
and make it look easy,
Right.
and enjoyable, and to really know themselves as human beings, and to partner with other people in a way that advances a whole as opposed to just a part.
Right. Oh, that's incredible. And I love that you learned very early that it's not a bad thing that you had your hands in different honeypots, like you said. It obviously was working quite well for you. Whereas what I notice in a lot of dancers is there's this fear of being too alternative, being too separate from the rest of the world, and thinking, oh, there's no way anyone would want to hire me, right? Because I don't have any skills outside of ballet. But you are an example that you can merge the two or the three, and you had all these different things going on to a great level of success. The other thing I wanted to ask for the dancers watching, I almost said listening. Some people listen to this podcast style, but anyway, so for those who are kind of looking at transitioning into either maybe a company or office setting or an entrepreneurial venture, what advice do you have for dancers who might be considering one of the two, though there are obviously many more options than that?
Yeah, so I was having a conversation like this actually recently with a very good friend of mine who danced with me at Boston Ballet, and she's just about to graduate with her undergrad and is ready for her first job out of college, right? Which is like not what you're actually going, right? Like there are two things that I would say. Number one is like, I think that really looking at your career and understanding what you got out of it in terms of like actual life skills and life experiences. Like, it's not about what ballets you danced, right? Because that piece is just not, it's going to not be relevant, whether you want to be if you're going into an office job. It's a language that very few people will understand. But like, I'm able to set a very specific and very high goal, do all of the due diligence and work and specificity that goes into preparing for that. And then I'm able to deliver under pressure and intense scrutiny when it is required of me. And not only that, but if something happens along the way, I can improvise to make it look like, everything was intentional to begin with, right? So for people who are interested in going into a more traditional office space or a more traditional workplace, I think it's really about being able to look at all of the skills that you've developed and translate them into the language of experience that you're interested in kind of penetrating, right? So that when you're building your resume, you're not putting like, I did 432 nutcrackers, right? But you're like, I was a team player in one of the biggest grossing productions of this world-renowned company.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a huge difference.
Yeah. So it's all in like the way that you package your skills so that people are like, oh, wow, well, we actually need someone who can do those things. If you're more interested in like an entrepreneurial path, I think it's like really just trusting in your capability to be your own business. I think every dancer is their own business. I think they understand, especially these days with social media and Instagram and all that stuff, like you are your own brand. Mm-hmm. And that continues, especially and importantly, once you start to become an entrepreneur, because especially at the beginning of a business, you're not really selling a product, you are selling something bigger than that, right? Yeah. So you go into these meetings and it's like, the question is, what need or what superpower are you going to give this person if they purchase your product, right? And you have to embody that.
Yeah.
In the same way that you would embody a role on stage on any given performance.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice, especially the last one you mentioned. Well, I love that you said speak their language, basically, because without some sort of way to translate your experience, there's no way that they can really perceive your value that you can add to the company. And then when you're on your own, of course, the question, in addition to what you said, that people are really asking in their heads is, can you really help me? And so if you're answering that question and creating an experience for them, that transmits so much trust. And yeah, that's super good advice that you shared. And as far as the kind of joys and challenges that you've faced, which are always, well, in every part of someone's journey, especially when they're launching into career number 2, what are some of the joys and challenges that you personally have faced?
So do you mean like beyond the transition part?
Yeah, maybe in the development phase of CFB.
Yeah. So I think for me, one of the biggest joys was, I think, a conversation that I had very early on with someone who really invests in professional development of their employees in the restaurant industry and is a big name in Boston. And I had a conversation with him and I was like, what do you think about this idea? And he was like, I think that's a huge need. I think you're the perfect person to do that. And I would pay for it in a second, and I was like, cool. Okay. So that was like this moment. I think I came home and told my now fiance about it and was like, I think that maybe there's something here that really resonates with me that maybe I could create that could like really be helpful for people and really speak to my background in an innovative way. So that was a big moment of joy. And I would say like any time, like there have been so many times where I've been leading a program or facilitating a workshop, and like the beauty of the work that I do is that I get to see people. They're almost all non-dancers, right? Every now and then I'll have someone who maybe had some kind of ballet training when they were younger, but none of them are anywhere close to professional ballet dancers. And they, like, when they get that embodied feeling for the first time and like it clicks and they're like, oh, like I see why this is important now. Or anyone who comes to me afterwards and they're like, I went into this and I was doubtful, like, I'm going to be honest, but by the end of it, I there are so many takeaways for me from this. And to me, those moments interspersed throughout all of these hours of programs and workshops that I provide, it just makes it so worth it and amazing,
Yes.
And then as for the challenges, I think it's just like, it's the questions that you face, the big questions of, I think first the question is there value in this that people will recognize? I feel like I have passed beyond that question. I know there's value in this that people recognize. The next question becomes, how do I make it an economically viable business? That's the one I'm facing now. And it's just a big challenge because this model, at least from what I've seen, is difficult to scale. There's a lot of kind of front end work in terms of business development. And especially because I'm bringing a completely new approach to the table. It's pioneering, which is exciting, but then also scary because you're like, well, it's just, there's always the potential that it just doesn't take.
Yeah.
On the level that I would like for it to grow.
Right. And thank you so much for being honest about that too, because I know we're both always growing. Though clearly it's amazing that you have answered that question of, is this valuable here, what I have? That's also, I've experienced that too. An amazing feeling when you're able to answer that first question. But
totally.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing openly about the honest challenges of it. And for the dancers also who are wondering, what do they really have to offer here? What skills or talents do you often see in dancers that could be transmitted into another career for them, or like could really translate well?
Yeah, so I think this idea of always learning and always growing and never attaining perfection, but always coming to the studio every day and, putting in the work and even in the performances, like enjoying the moment fully in the present moment, but being like, okay, well, next time this will be better. Like that growth mindset or like growth oriented mindset, I think is the most powerful thing that we have as dancers. And I don't think that you get very far as a dancer, even if you have all the facility in the world, if you don't have that, right? And I've seen dancers who have been met with a lot of harsh kind of negativity about their bodies or their feet, something ridiculous, and they have proven everyone wrong because of that, right? So I think like that mindset, when aligned with something you're actually interested in, will be the most powerful thing that you have, and I don't know if this is super relevant to this question, but I just realized like one of the other things I wanted to say about like finding that first job after you transition is that I think there could be a big pressure for dancers who are blessed to have spent so much time in something that they absolutely loved, right? Their passion, their identity, their physicality, and everything was lumped into this one experience, right? And that is rare. So when you go on to find your like first job, if that's what if you're looking for a job, like don't be disheartened when you show up into your first job and once the excitement of like day one wears off, you're like, wow, like I don't love this. This isn't my dream job. Like that's okay. Like so long as you're in a position where you are learning and adding to your repertoire of skills, eventually, like you will get to the point where you're more aligned, right? With or towards something that is deeply meaningful for you.
Quote unquote, that's golden advice right there. That's so good. especially, I love that you mentioned that they will become more aligned, and maybe it is an opportunity to become more diversified in where you feel fulfilled in your life. It's not all in one experience anymore, which can also be really freeing for someone who's used to just identifying and relying on that one source of joy for all their fulfillment in life.
Yeah.
And for, let's see, what was I going to ask? Oh, how important do you think it is to like really plan ahead while you're still dancing for that next step?
Yeah. So I don't really know many dancers, if any, who don't have a hard time with the transition.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think like if you're looking at like all of the things that I did while I was dancing, like I did my undergrad, like as far as I'm concerned, that's really planning ahead. I was like working on the organizational side and learning about stuff there. I had like a food blog I was writing, so I had all these other social circles. I had all of this stuff like ready, and I knew that once I retired, I was going to go into something else.
Mm-hmm.
My retirement personally came a lot earlier than I was expecting, and I had like a total crash landing. Even with all those things that I had,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's a great idea to always have a keen idea of your interests. And I think if your interests are all in the ballet world and you're literally not interested in anything else, like that's okay too,
Yeah.
right? But I think that there is a beauty in having diverse perspectives, as I mentioned earlier. And if you can be cultivating those interests while you're also dancing, particularly in times when maybe your dance career is not super fulfilling, right? When
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're not getting the roles that you think you deserve, or you have a summer off, or you're injured, right? Those are golden
Yes.
opportunities to be like, okay, there's a world outside of dance. Who am I within that world?
Yeah.
So I think cultivating different experiences for yourself is part of what makes life so amazing if you have the opportunity to do so. And I would encourage people very much. But the idea of like having a perfect plan in place to
Yeah.
avoid that kind of identity crisis and angst once you do retire from the ballet, I just wouldn't want people to think that they have everything figured out only to realize that like there's a loss that you have to go through,
Yes.
and it's going to be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but you'll
Totally.
absolutely work your way through it, and it's
Yeah.
completely
It'll be
fine.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think as you can probably attest even more than I, like there is a lot of potential to build a deeper pool of resources for dancers so that once they're going through that transition, they can have a little bit more help and support navigating it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to feel like you've lost your family and you're alone moving forwards, right?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Especially staying plugged in with your community of dancers, and yeah, having people around you who remind you of like, you're going to be okay. You're not crazy. This is normal. We still love you. That's
Yeah.
everything, everything. Well, thank you so much for everything that you shared. Honestly, I knew you were going to share a lot of wisdom, but you really brought it to the table today. So thank you so much. And I know that a lot of dancers are out there saying thank you to you as well. I hope you get to read some of the comments too. So thank you again. We'll sign off here, and best of luck in scaling CFB. And I wish you all the success.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And if anyone has any questions, I think you included, right, like at Rachel on point with an E, obviously at the end.
Yes.
And I'm always happy to be helpful if I can, and it's nice to share some of my experience.
Right. Yes. And I forgot to mention, everyone follow Rachel on Point on Instagram, right? And I will also link below your website so everyone can check out more of what you do. Other than that, if there are any other resources for everyone, I will put that all down below so people can find you and continue to be inspired by what you're doing. But again, thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure's mine. Thank you.
Okay, wasn't she wonderful? Wasn't she lovely? I personally had so many aha moments during that conversation, and I hope that you did too. If there was anything in particular that really jumped out to you from what Rachel said, do comment down below what you learned. I think that will help anyone else reading the comments reinforce all of the wisdom that Rachel was sharing. So if you are new, please subscribe, like this video so that I know to make more videos just like this. I am so inspired to bring on other guests on this channel because, of course, I have my own things to say, but there are so many other dancers who don't have a YouTube channel like this, but have really, really important ideas to share. And I want this channel to be a platform for sharing great ideas. It's like TED Talks, but for ballet. Maybe. I don't know. So thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye.